back. He took my crankbait. That was a good crankbait. Oh, gosh. I wasn't even... I want that crankbait back so bad. That's just a freak thing. It hardly ever happens to me where I get a break off, and it must have been a nick on the line right above the snap, because I have all my leader here. I had a snap on, and that's where it broke, right at the snap. And it's 8-pound test. Just a freak thing. I guess I didn't check my line there well enough, and off he came. Perfect situation for throwing a deep diving crankbait, by the way. We're on a point here and the wind's blowing into the point. When that happens, the fish start to, when they want to feed, they'll just come right up on the point and just sit there and wait for the food to come to them. And that's what happened. That crankbait came to that fish. It was a nice largemouth. I saw him, and he just broke my line and got off. Gonna have to tie another crankbait on and see if we can do some more damage out here. But this time, hopefully, we'll get him to the boat. Yep, big fish. Barely hooked. Strong. Definitely a crankbait cruncher here. Uh-oh, uh-oh. Settle down. Settle down, fish. Oh, yeah. Cranking. Frankenstein. Nice one. Yeah, when conditions are right. This is the kind of fish you can get on a crankbait. That's a good one there. Frankenstein. Alright, buddy. Good. Frankenstein. Whew. In order to be a good crankbait fisherman, there's a couple of things that are very important to understand. The first and foremost is the dive path of the crankbait. The way a crankbait goes down and then comes along the bottom and goes back up again. It's really like a bathtub shape. Imagine a bathtub, the shape of a bathtub. Your crankbait lands here, it comes down on an angle, it gets to its deepest level, it comes along at that deepest level for a while, and then it starts to come back up as you're reeling up towards your rod. It's a bathtub shape. Not a U, more like a bathtub shape, an extended U. And it's very important to understand that with these deeper diving crankbaits, because you can use that to your advantage for catching fish. So one way you can fish a crankbait, if you know this, is you throw it, you sit your boat out in deeper water, you throw the crankbait to shallower water, and you reel it down the break, the break line, the depth line going down into deeper water. Here's a fish I caught doing that. See, what happened there was I threw to shallower water near a weed edge and I started reeling that bait down, and as I was going down, a fish ambushed it and grabbed it. So that's one way you can catch the fish. Another way is to utilize the deepest part of that dive and to be grinding the bottom. You want a hard bottom when you're fishing a crankbait, and you can just grind up the bottom as you're fishing that crankbait along the bottom. And then another place where I often get bit with a crankbait is on the way back up. You're bouncing bottom, and your boat's here, and as you start to reel it back up this way, when it changes that direction and comes up and starts angling up, sometimes a fish that was following it will smash it then, absolutely smash it. Some of my hardest hits were when that angle changes, and I catch the fish that way. Another way you can utilize the crankbait is opposite of what I said the first time. So instead of sitting out in deeper water and casting to shallow, I'll sit my boat in shallow water. Usually I do this on a point, and I'll cast out over deep water. And so what happens is you have this point that goes down like this. You're casting out here over deep water. Your crankbait goes down here, and it might go into the, eventually it'll go into the bottom and on its way up. But usually right before it hits bottom, the fish that are suspended out there will oftentimes just pin it right there and just smash it there and catch one, and you'll catch one that way. Here's a fish I caught that way. Ooh, there's fish. Coming up. There we go. That's what we're talking about. Look at that tail from spawning a couple months back. It's a good one. Well, we made up for that other one. Long. Nice one. Let's put them back. I like cranking. When it's on, and it's a lot of fun. And they usually slam it. And he slammed it. He got good hooks in them. That means they want it. It's probably a good color bait. We'll know a little more if we can get a few more hooked. So a couple of ways to think about fishing crankbaits, and the retrieves are important too. My number one retrieve is to reel real fast, stop, real fast, stop. So I might do 3, 4, 5, 6 turns, stop, 3, 4, 5, 6 turns, stop. And especially I'll do that right away, because sometimes fish are suspending out there and they see this stupid crankbait coming down all erratic like, and then stopping and going, and they'll hit it before it ever gets to the bottom. But even when it's on the bottom, I like to do that. I'll be bouncing bottom, stop, it floats up a little bit, bounce bottom, stop, floats up, and it's constant. And if you watch the videos where I'm catching these fish, you'll see that's what I'm doing most of the time. Another way is to get it down on the bottom and just to slowly crawl it on the bottom. Once it's down there, I'll slow down and crawl it. That usually works better when the water's cold, when you're getting into winter time, but sometimes that works very well too. And sometimes you can use your rod. You just kind of sweep it along, and you can feel what it's doing a little bit better through your rod tip that way. So you just kind of sweep it, and then you catch up to it with the reel, sweep it, catch it up, and you're just kind of keeping it down on the bottom and feeling what's down there. And if you feel something like a piece of wood or a stick, you stop, because if it hits a stick, and you stop, it'll back up and come back up again. And sometimes it'll come up back up into a fish's face, and they'll just slam it. When you reel down again, you got them on. So that works too. And it's good to start to really try to feel what your crankbait is doing down there, because the more you can do that, the more you'll know when to stop and allow it to back out of what it's getting in. Because you can, obviously you can get it hung up in fallen trees and brush piles and stuff like that. But it's a really good bait to fish over brush piles and stuff like that as well. It's also very good on ledges and very good on hard rocky bottoms. Crankbaits are great. I really like fishing them. When that bite is on, it's a lot of fun, and it catches much bigger than average fish. It catches big fish usually. In fact, I think it's right up there with the jig, probably right next to the jig for the biggest fish that I've catch usually on the crankbait. It's usually jig, crankbait, topwaters. Those are some of the biggest fish I get on those baits, as well as soft plastics as well. But that crankbait bite, when it's on it, it can be really good. And so you have to throw it for a while to see. Sometimes you won't catch them on it, but bam, when you do, you'll catch multiple fish on it, and it's just usually they hit it pretty hard. And it's just a fun way to catch the fish. You know, be aware of colors too. You want to use colors that mimic the forage that you're fishing, you know, with that are there. You know, sometimes I'll use a sunfish color. If the water's dingy, I like to have a little bit of chartreuse in the bait. This is a root beer color here. If you have a little bit of stain in the water, I really like this color. It's a nice natural color. It's got that dark green on the back, little olive, little white, and a little orangish yellow on the bottom. Really good color for a little stained water. Clear water, I'll go with more shad-like colors, more natural, translucent type colors. Just kind of experiment with that. Sometimes colors don't even matter with these cranks. If the bite is on, the fish sometimes they just want to slam them. And so sometimes color won't make that much of a difference, but you got to experiment with them. And then the other thing I like to do is sometimes I'll choose a crankbait that goes deeper than the water I'm fishing on purpose, just so that I'm grinding the crap out of the bottom with it. And sometimes that's a way to get them to go too. And then other times I'll pick a more appropriate crankbait that goes to the depth that I'm fishing. That deep little end that I just showed you there, it's great for like 8 to 12 feet depth. I like the DT16 for 12 to 16 foot, and then 16 to 22 feet. The Norman DD22 is a really good crankbait for that. One of the other retrieves that I like to do sometimes is I'll start off like a slow basic retrieve just to get the thing down there, and then as I'm retrieving I'll just go faster and faster and faster all the way back to the boat. Sometimes I'll go faster and faster and I'll stop, and then I'll do that whole thing all over again. Start slow, faster, faster, faster. And what that I think imitates sometimes, if there's a fish following, sometimes I think it looks like a bait fish like getting scared and trying to run away, and sometimes you'll get the fish to slam that. It doesn't work all the time, but sometimes that's the only way I can get them to bite. Those are rare days, but those are good days oftentimes because I can get them to bite that way and I can get a lot. So remember that, keep that in the back of your mind when you're throwing crankbaits, to experiment with that retrieve as well. Let me take some time right now and show you some of my favorite crankbaits to throw. Okay, I'm going to take some time now and show you some of my favorite deep diving crankbaits. I have several here laid out on the deck. One of the ones that I like the most is the Rapala DT16. This is the DT16. You can see the bills are really worked over on these because I've used these quite hard. I like these different types of natural colors. Here's another one. And another one here. Looks like it's starting to rain. Hopefully I can get this done before the rain gets too bad. I might have to cut this off and reconvene somewhere else. Looks like that's what I'm going to have to do. Well, the weatherman wasn't too far off. The rain just started out there and I didn't want to get my crankbaits all wet, so I quickly collected them and put them in my camera bag. That was a mistake, because when I came in here I had a mess. They were all stuck to the sides of the bag, and finally got everything reorganized and can show you now. So we were talking about the DT16s. I like these natural type colors. There's also the DT20. It's got a little bit of it's the same size crankbait, but the bill is longer and it has a weight in the bill to help get it down even deeper still. I rely heavily on Rapala DT16s. Going a little deeper, I like the Norman DD22s. These can get down to as deep as 22 feet on a long cast with the right line. I like both the silent models. These two are silent. And I also like, at times, the ones with the rattles as well. These are Strike King. I like the 5 and the 6XD. Strike King has a really good crankbait here. 6 Sense has some nice crankbaits that I'm just learning to fish in the last few years, but they make good baits. Here's Lucky Craft crankbait. This is a Finesse CB Fat 12. It's supposed to go down to about 12 feet. It's a good crankbait. This one's a good one, and I heard it's no longer made anymore. This is the Jackal Muscle Deep, and it goes down to 15 plus. So I'm not sure if that's true, but I heard a rumor that they no longer make this bait, and that's a shame if that's true, because this Jackal Muscle Deep is a very good crankbait. Going old school, we got the Bombers here. These I don't think are available anymore. I'm not really sure, but these are the Bomber Fat-Free Shads, and this is a Bill Dance model here. It's got the real nice shad shine to it. This is just a white and black. Here's another Bill Dance model. They also make one that suspends. I use those at times too, but these fat-free shads catch a lot of fish if you can still get your hands on them. And then last but not least, I have here another Norman bait. This is a deep little end, so it's a little smaller, goes down 8 to 12 feet. On a good cast, you can get this thing down to 12 feet. And this has been a very good bait for me as well. The baits that I fish the most tend to be the Rapala DT16, the Norman Little N, and the Norman DD22. Those are the ones I have a lot of confidence in. And the best thing about all those baits is you don't have to break your bank account to buy them, especially the Normans. They're a pretty low price. I've read complaints where people have trouble with them out of the package where they're not tuned. And that might be true now and then, but you can tune them. I read some complaints recently about these deep little ends. Someone had like 8 out of 8 that weren't tuned. I just bought 2 of them and they're perfectly tuned. I didn't have to touch them. They went straight down. In order to tune a crankbait, when it comes to you, as it's coming towards you, you point your rod at that bait. You want that bait to be right in line with your rod as your rod is pointed at the bait. If it goes to the left, then you take pliers and you bend the line tie a little bit to the right. If it goes to the right from that rod, then you just bend that line tie a little bit to the left. And a little bit will do you. You don't need a lot. But you definitely want to, if you need to, you definitely want to tune them so that they dive straight. I don't think I've ever had to tune a DT16. They I believe, are tank tuned before you get them. So out of the package, I don't think I've ever had to tune one. So the DT16 is great that way. And these other baits are good as well. But those 3 are probably my confidence baits. Let's talk a little bit about line. We've already talked about my rod and reel setup. The whole idea with crankbaits is to be able to cast them as far as you can cast them. Deep divers now. That's not the same with square bills and some of the other types where you're fishing around heavy cover. But the deep diving ones, you want to throw them as far as you can. And the reason for that is you want to get them down and you want them to stay down for as long as you can through that cast. Remember that bathtub curve, right? So you want them down here for the longest period of time. The way to do that is to get a long cast. For me, the way I get that long cast, or the thing that helps me, is I use braided line. Oftentimes I'll use 15-pound or 10-pound. If I want to go further and get that bait down further, I'll use 10-pound braid, and I will use an 8-pound monofilament or fluorocarbon leader. And the leader is usually 2 rod lengths if the water is a little stained, maybe 3 or 4 rod lengths if the water is extremely clear. But I won't, I use that, the idea is small diameter line. That's where the braid comes in handy. You can get 10-pound braid and the diameter is extremely small. Even though braid floats, that real thin diameter line will get you down further. And then I'll use an 8-pound test, sometimes a 10-pound test leader, depending on what's down there. And that leader, I want some good length so the fish can't see the braid. And you know, I want that leader to be light as well, or as light as I can get away with, so that I can get that good dive straight down to the bottom. Now, sometimes you'll lose fish with that lighter line, but I feel it's important to get the bait out there a long way. And because the rod has a parabolic bend to it when you're casting these crankbaits, it needs that, because first of all, you got to cast them out, so you need that good parabolic bend to the rod. But also, when the fish grabs this, you want to make sure your rod has some give to it so the fish can suck the bait in before you pull it out of its mouth and get those hooks in there real good. And so because I'm using that rod, I feel I can get away with the braided line. In fact, I like it. I prefer it better, because if I didn't have the braided line, if I was just using fluorocarbon or just using straight monofilament and that rod, I wouldn't get a lot of really good feel for what's happening with that crankbait down there. That braid helps me get good feel for what it's hitting, what I'm coming through, when a fish hits, all those things. So for me, that's the way I like to set it up. Everybody has their own preferences with that, and I would suggest that you experiment and see what works the best for you. But for me, I'll go with the 10-pound braid and maybe 8-pound leader most of the time, and get that deep diving bait down where it needs to be so I can catch more fish. Let's take it to the water and catch another one. Got a good one on the crankbait here, folks. Oh yeah, it's a nice one. Trying to see how he's hooked. Oh, he's hooked good. I think I can just lift him. Come here, buddy. Yeah, that's a nice one. I got him. Under control. That's why I like throwing crankbaits. They catch big fish. This guy's beat up. He's got scars on him and stuff, but it's a good fish. Crankbait fish usually are. Thank you, buddy. Caught that one on the Norman Deep Little N, root beer color. Really nice crankbait. The Deep Little N is a really good crankbait for that 8 to 12 foot depth range. If you throw it far enough on light enough line, you can get it down at 12 feet. And this is 8-pound test. I can get it down to 11 or 12 on a long cast. And I like that 8 to 12 foot range on a crankbait. It's just the next level up from a deep diving one. You know, recently I changed reels on my deep diving crankbait rod. The rod is an old Team Daiwa S series cranking rod. It's my favorite rod for crankbaiting. I think it's partly glass and partly graphite, so it's got that parabolic bend to it, and I can throw a crankbait, a DT16 or a DT22 a country mile with it with the right reel. I was using a Fluger Tryon 5.2 to 1 gear ratio bait caster for throwing these crankbaits. This is what I had been doing for a long time, and I don't fill the reel all the way up with line, and I use braid, and then I use monofilament leader, 2 rod lengths, usually 10-pound test, sometimes less if I want to get the bait down deeper. And the braid could be less, right? 15-pound test braid, 10-pound test braid. The lighter, the smaller the diameter of the line, the further you can get that crankbait down. And sometimes that's important with these deep divers. You want to get it down and keep it down. But what I was doing, and the reason why I don't fill the reel all the way up when I'm fishing a crankbait is because just the way they cast, it's easy to backlash them. And it's easy to break them off. Like if you get a backlash and the line stops and you only have 8-pound test on, that force snap, your lure goes a country mile and you have to go looking for it sometimes. But that's not why I changed. I changed because I was working too hard. Crankbaiting works you out. You got to make sure you're using good ergonomics when you're fishing crankbaits. The casting should be in your wrists. It's this flick of the wrist that makes that bait go so far. It's not your shoulders, it's not your forearms, it's in the wrist. And so use good ergonomics, and use good ergonomics when you're retrieving. You're seeing me, I'm retrieving like a maniac, and the purpose for that is to get that bait to dive and stop, dive and stop, and look very erratic in the water. That's getting me a reaction strike. And so I went from, and I should have probably had the reel filled a little bit more. I actually lost a couple of fish because that 5.2 to 1 gear ratio was so darn slow that it didn't take up enough line, and I'd have to reel like crazy to catch up to a fish. And I lost some fish that way, and I didn't have a good feel for the lure all the time because I was always having to reel down like a maniac, and if I stopped, I'd have to reel down to catch up on any slack that got into the line. So I changed last night to the exact same reel, Fluger Tryon, but this one has a 6.3 to 1 gear ratio. A little faster, so it might not have the same kind of power that a 5.2 to 1 would have. But the handle's pretty good size. I filled it up a little more. I'm casting the same way, and I'm in much better contact with the crankbait, and I'm not working myself out so hard getting it down and doing that erratic retrieve. So I'm much happier with the 6.3 to 1, and this is just a personal preference for each person fishing these crankbaits. There's some guys who actually go with faster, higher gear ratio reels. But the problem that you give up with that is it'll work you out a little harder. It's a little harder to reel the bait in and that kind of thing, especially for those larger, bigger crankbaits, the 8 and 10 XDs, for example. But this 6.3 to 1 I feel is a good compromise. It actually feels better to me because I'm in better contact with the bait. I don't have to work so hard to get it down. I don't have to go so crazy to make that erratic retrieve. And so far I'm really liking it. So we'll continue to use the 6.3 to 1. I don't have any issues casting. I can cast this thing the same distance I cast it before with the 5.2 to 1. So I'm happy with it for me. And this is something you just have to experiment for yourself and figure out what works best for you. Remember that bathtub shape of that retrieve and think about ways you can utilize that to catch more fish. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give me the thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Very important. Trying to figure out that YouTube algorithm is not easy, but if you subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. Be safe out there. Hope to see you on the water, and may God bless your fishing endeavors.